I'm Tobias Revel.
And I'm Radha Mystery.
And this is Futur-ish, a podcast about how nothing is new and everything has happened before.
We've been working and playing in futures for over a decade of hype and bluster amidst increasing uncertainty and complexity.
In each episode, we explore a recent event or signal for its historical context and speculate on future possibilities.
And make it make sense for people like you and me.
I look the most Tim Burton on a Monday, and so I wear a hat.
I'm not usually a hat girly either, but you know what? I recently started to really like wearing hats because for school drop-off, it means I don't have to have my shit together and I can just hide everything under a hat and look quite well kept, well kept.
That's what I was doing. I think I have to go back for the hat. It's not the hair.
Go back for the hat. It's giving, what is it giving? Timothy Chalamet, if you want to be like one of the kids.
I don't have Timothy Chalamet.
Timothy Chalamet.
M. Night Timothy Chalamet's hairline, unfortunately, because I'm about 38 years older than M. Night Timothy Chalamet. This is the second call we've started with hair tips in the last week. One was in a very professional setting.
That's true. I went down like a few rabbit holes over the last few days. And and I'm guessing once again, you have not read the show notes.
I am a professional in all but practice.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Professional by word, but not by deed.
Yeah. You talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk.
Absolutely not.
In true Radha fashion, it started a few years ago, but I did not know these dots would connect in this way. So buckle up, Bubba. We're going on a ride.
Can that be the new catchphrase? Let's change it. At the beginning. We'll redo the intro. We'll re-record it. Let's do it now.
Anyway, so the first thing was a few years ago, I was listening to a podcast and they had done a feature on this group of teenagers in Brooklyn who created this thing called the Luddite Club. And it was basically a group of like young folks who were like, we don't want smartphones, we don't want social media. And it's not necessarily that they were against the use of smartphones. It was that they were against what was happening through the consumption of social media, what was happening to like attention spans, to interpersonal relationships, to all of these things. Anyway, so that was like back in 2022. And these are kids who have been going through a middle school and high school experience at the height of the pandemic when you are really supposed to be working out your interpersonal skills, right? And how you relate to your peers and how you make sense of your emotions and like going through puberty, all of these things that they had to do remotely online like this in the way that you and I record. So that was something that has kind of like stuck in my mind. I think that episode aired in 2022 on this podcast. And then I was scrolling the internet of looking for fun academic papers to read, as you do. So I happened upon this paper called Exploring the Social Life of Urban Spaces Through AI. Now, that title itself, what does that remind you of if you are privy to works from the 1980s about urban space?
I'm going to assume it's not about English parliamentary democracy.
Never. It's never about that, Tobias. It's also never about Dungeons and Dragons. So let's just clear that up right now. So I read that title and I like looked at the abstract of the paper just to kind of start off with. And it reminded me of this documentary that was released on September 26, 1980 called The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces. And it was put together by this American sociologist named William H. White. And it's a film that I had watched when I was first in architecture school. So I do forgive you for not knowing because you did not go to architecture school. And what's become of you?
I think what I could have been if I hadn't done a degenerate degree like typography.
Wait, what was your actual undergrad degree?
Technically, it's typography. My BA
You did graphic design?
I want to caution you there. I did not do graphic design. I did typography, specifically typography.
My apologies.
Typography has a lot of nuance in it.
Anyway, so the title of the paper reminded me of that documentary, The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces by William H. White. And what I had really loved about the 1980s documentary was that it was basically like an anthropological study on how people use public space, how they walk through public space, what their interactions are. It was really interesting because this documentary influenced a lot of policy making in New York around urban spaces and how we use urban spaces. So there was always this principle of how architects and developers thought urban spaces would be used. And then there are the ways in which people actually use them, right? And White actually coined terms like hostile architecture, which is where you had benches and things like that had those bumps on them. So unhoused people could not sleep on them or rest on them, or they didn't want folks kind of like lingering in certain spaces. So anyway, he had a lot of influence. And when I went in to kind of read the paper itself, I found that the team from MIT Media Lab who ran this study actually referenced like 638 minutes of footage that White had earlier recorded. And then they use computer vision and deep learning techniques to examine video footage from 1979 to 1980 that was in the documentary and compare it to video footage from 2008 to 2010. So they compare video footage across this like 30-year delta. And what they found was that the average walking speed had increased by 15%. Now, when I first saw this title and saw that initial finding, I hadn't gotten to the part where they said that the data was from 2008 to 2010. So this is when the iPhone had just come out. The apps marketplace was like a burgeoning space. Social media was there, but I don't think it was like as prevalent in our lives at that time. So originally I was like, oh, the correlation has to be because of the use of social media and people's like interpersonal skills have completely diminished and blah, blah, blah. That was not actually the case. So they had these 3 findings in this paper. The first finding was people linger less in public spaces and walk through sites faster than in 1980. The second finding was that public spaces are dominated primarily by single pedestrians. And the third finding was that there was a major decline in group encounters. So now I will say the primary correlation that they have to these is that basically like folks are making more money, so their time is more valuable in the early 2000s as opposed to the 1980s. I was not convinced by this, and this is why I'm starting off with this paper as part of my story, but I'm not using it for the findings that they have provided because I'm not convinced by them. And also, the aim of the paper was to show how AI methods can analyze videos to study group dynamics in public spaces. So it was primarily a technology piece, which, big surprise, it's coming out of MIT Media Lab. So like park that for a second because I do want to hold space for this idea that like over a 30-year period before the real kind of prevalence of the use of social media and smartphones, and the iPhone maybe became a little bit more affordable to folks, we're already seeing a 15% increase in walking speeds, and we're seeing a decline in group encounters and public spaces being more dominated by single pedestrians, right? So there's that piece of it. Now, we're in the year 2025, so I can only imagine the impact that the use of things like social media has had on whether or not we linger, whether or not we talk to strangers, whether or not we hang out in public spaces, right? You see everyone is kind of like heads down in their phones on their commutes and wherever they feel like there's kind of some like dead airspace, right? Now, the other thing that I then found was I was on TikTok in May of this year, and I came across this video by this account named Ask Cat GPT, and she had done this video of this, what I will call an art project. It was a clear kind of acrylic rectangle that felt pretty similar to the proportions of a phone, and it was called the Methaphone. And this thing went like absolutely viral. Within 2 short weeks, her Methaphone video would be seen more than 150 million times across TikTok, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Okay, so there is something in there that resonated with this idea of like having gotten used to having our phone in our hands or in our pockets or on our person. What might happen if we subbed that in with something that still felt like a phone but didn't have any connectivity? It was literally like a piece of acrylic, okay, that had been laser cut into the shape of a phone. So there's the lack of lingering, there's the lack of like group interactions, there's these art projects called the Methaphone, which really seem to resonate. And then we have these devices popping up. So there's a company called Rabbit. And they have built this thing called the Rabbit R1. Have you heard of this?
Of course.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about it?
Failed AI gizmo. It was designed by Teenage Engineering. It was one of the first ideas of a couple of things have been like this recently. Humane Pin is probably the other one of note, which is the idea of loading a large language model onto a portable device slightly smaller than a phone that's somehow attached to your body, usually somewhere on your chest around a necklace. The Rabbit R1 got quite a lot of hype because of the Teenage Engineering design, and it had a completely impossible business model where I think the deal was you bought it for like a couple $100, and then you basically got free OpenAI API inquiries from it for X amount of time, and it had a camera on it so you could ask about things you were seeing. But then they worked out that it would start being like $500 a month in subscription in order for the company to start turning into revenue into profit.
The one thing I did like about this is that the company says it took cues from the Tamagotchi digital toy pet of our childhood. Did you have one when you were a kid?
I didn't have one, but I
did.
I did desire one.
I did have one, and I only had one because my mother's boss was Japanese, and she had gone to Japan, and she brought one back for us, and I thought it was really cool.
That's a very classy story, actually. That's very good. You come off very well in that story as a child.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. There's another device that I have. I don't know if you've heard of Terra Compass, also AI powered. So this is a pocket-sized gadget that guides its user along a route using haptic feedback and a subtle arrow interface like a compass needle. Their whole sell is that it should enable people to go on walks without their phone, but still have some kind of guiding mechanism. The routes are bespoke and created by AI in response to the user's prompts. It can learn more about you as it kind of inhabits your space, but a prompt might say Kyoto architecture tour back by 4 p.m. or 2-hour stroll with patisserie visit.
I do actually know this one. I did an event once with the designer who was a lovely guy and really smart, and I really respect. I don't have much more to say about it than that, but that's where I saw it. He was talking about the design, and I was like, wow, this guy's smart, and this is really cool.
So I'll say this, we're seeing some devices, not all, I don't want to make a blanket statement. We're seeing some devices where the USP, the unique selling point, the value add is that it breaks us away from our phones, right? And then we're seeing these art projects like Methaphone that allude to this idea that we are trying to disconnect ourselves from these things we feel quite tethered to, right? And there are folks out there in the world who see this as something they can capitalize on. Okay. Now, coming back to the Luddite Club, a lot of those folks are now in university and they are holding gatherings and conventions. And actually, the original Luddite Club from Brooklyn is now turning their student-led club from high school into a nonprofit, a 501c3 is what we call it over here in the US. A charity is what you might call it in the UK, if I remember correctly. And their kind of mission is that we're a team of former screenagers turning our student-led club into a nonprofit, connecting young people to the communities and the knowledge to conquer big tech's addictive agendas themselves. So they have chapters all over the US now. One of the clubs is at Columbia University. And they basically said 5 hours of daily screen time equals 15 years of life by age 70, which is wild. But there was a Luddite-based student collective at Columbia called the Lamp Club, and they recently held a gathering in September, and it was a conference basically called Shitphone. Do you know what the acronym for Shitphone is? Or what Shitphone is the acronym for? Sorry. Scathing hatred of information technology and the passionate hemorrhaging of our neoliberal experience. I would say the kids are all right, wouldn't you?
It makes the BTS army into goddamn poets, that, doesn't
it? That's right. So historical Luddites were 19th century English textile workers who were among the first to have concerns about automated machinery, right? And so this is we've always had this issue with whenever some new innovation happens with automation, and these folks believed that there would be fewer jobs, lower pay, and compromised quality in the product. That narrative probably sounds familiar as we kind of head into the automation of tasks with AI, right? So these workers formed an organized militia. They often destroyed the textile machines and planned raids, and they referred to themselves as Luddites after Ned Ludd, a name used as a pseudonym in letters to mill owners and government officials. So the mill and factory owners responded by shooting the protesting Luddites, and eventually the movement was suppressed by legal and military force. But these days, and I want to emphasize this, the Luddite clubs that are being led by the youth at the high school and university level, at least in the US, they're not, again, against smartphone usage. What they're really against is the impact of things like social media and what that is doing to behavior and cognition and what they're seeing amongst their peers, right? Now, what I will say is, like, we talk often about this highly overused quote that the future is here, but it's just unevenly distributed, right? By William Gibson. We hear that all the time. I try not to use it very much these days, but it is a very pertinent quote, and I think it's very telling. You look at kind of like all of these things, the AI devices that are trying to get us untethered from our phones, the, folks even 20 years ago walking faster in public spaces, not really interacting with each other, all of these Luddite clubs popping up and these kind of conventions and gatherings being led by students who are saying, hey, we don't want to be on our phones. We don't want to be kind of tethered by devices. And then you turn to somewhere like China, where what we're starting to actually see is that parents are opting for, like, this is a quote that I found in an article on restofworld.org, one of my favorite blogs. University teacher Wu Ling, who, while looking for an English tutor for her 12-year-old son, picked a robot dog worth $1,170. The 1-foot-tall alpha dog, which weighs about 8 kilos, 18 pounds, was developed by robotic startup Welon and is powered by DeepSeek's AI model. She said, my son needs company, but we are a one-child family. He asks the dog about all kinds of things, national news, weather, geography. Through Alpha Dog, he is learning what the world is like. So there is now this emerging generation of quite young children, 4 years old, 12 years old, who are being raised with companions and chatbots that are based in AI. There's another example, Hong Mingbo, a 31-year-old in the eastern city of Hangzhou, let her 4-year-old son chat with Daobao when she needed a break. And the chatbot, in a gentle female voice, conversed with the child about bananas, robots, kindergarten, and his favorite food, tofu. She does say that she's worried that exposure to AI could affect her child's development because after interacting with Daobao, her son became impatient with her, and she attributes this possibly to the AI chatbot being so accommodating.
Do you allow your children to interact with autonomous so-called AI in any way?
No, I don't. Do you?
Yeah. Not of her own volition, but she likes asking cloud questions.
Well, my younger kid is like just learning words, but my daughter has not yet figured out the like, hey Siri prompting, or she hasn't clocked it.
I'm quite a heavy user of that interface because of often having my hands occupied with DIY or cooking, whatever. So she's heard it enough that she's got used to it, and she will ask to like play music and stuff, which is fine. But I started using cloud as intellectual backup when I would insist that like broccoli is good for you.
No way.
And she'd be like, no, it isn't. I'd be like, it is. Let's ask cloud. And I'd be like, yeah, broccoli is really good for you. And she'd be like, oh, okay.
Wow. But you know what? It takes a village, they say, right?
It takes a village.
So, and then the last piece that I'll say here is and I'm going to need your help in pronouncing this, Mr. Englishman, who has some French ability. What is
dare you? How dare you accuse me of Frenchness?
What a traitor you are. How do you say that word that I just typed in the chat? I don't know.
The first bit is the Seine.
Yeah.
So that's the river.
What's the second bit?
Paris. Well, poor. Seine.
All right.
Poor.
So it's a little village with a population of about 2,000 people.
We love a little village on this podcast.
We do love a little village. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. They voted in a mini referendum to restrict smartphone use in public spaces. So it's called a proposed screen-free charter. Now, the one thing to note is only 277 people actually voted in general, but of those, 54% were in favor of this charter. So if we are kind of like connecting the dots here, I wonder what the world is going to look like, or how, to make a completely blanket statement, what my children's relationship with devices and AI is going to look like. And I wonder if the pendulum is starting to kind of swing back. I think this one in France is like one of the first examples that I've seen.
Well, the entire nation of Australia, I think, is new law that prohibits anyone under the age of 16 of having an account on major platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, which takes effect this December. So Australia is effectively banned or restricted access to social media for under 16-year-olds.
That is amazing. I wonder how they will enforce that, because you can say you're over 16, right? When you click the yes, no, but...
They basically are going to say that it's the social media's responsibility to do that, or they'll be fined up to 50 million Australian dollars
Wow.
if they don't take reasonable steps to restrict access to under 16s.
So that is really interesting. I feel like we're coming up on this, like I said, this like inflection point and this tension, right? Because you have examples like, again, if we're going back to China, provincial authorities have set their own goals. So Beijing is making AI education mandatory in schools. And I don't want to conflate like AI and social media, but I do think these things are starting to have similar impacts on neurological development and like behavior and cognition in young people. So that's why I'm kind of bucketing them together. In the US, there's an organization called Alpha Schools who use AI to teach children reading, math, and entrepreneurship. In India, OpenAI is training school teachers to plan lessons. Colombia is using Meta's AI bots in their WhatsApp messaging app. And Kenya are doing lesson planning with AI tools, while Mattel, it seems to be investing in partnering with OpenAI to develop AI-powered toys. So I don't know. I just feel like there's something happening there. I feel like, as I said before, the pendulum seems to be kind of like swinging back. There's a couple examples of policy that's starting to respond to that. You know, you gave an example, and then there's one about the little French village. But I don't know. What do you make of all this, Tobias?
Well, I think it's an astute observation. I would say the thing...
Can I say that's like the nicest thing you've ever said to me before? That's an astute observation.
Try.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
I think the piece that's missing there is the driver, which is enshittification. Yeah. So you talked, for instance, about young people. Obviously, we're generalizing hugely, but let's say young people disregarding the sort of telecommunications behavior of our generation of millennials, you know, addicted to our phones and looking at TikTok and whatever all the time, even though neither of us have TikTok. The other thing that sprang to mind is the rash of, let's say, more privileged folks, particularly, you know, hypocritically Silicon Valley elite banning their kids from having smartphones. You talked about different areas and places that are banning them, including the entire countries of Australia. I don't think that's just... I think that is down to the behaviors they've enforced, and the behaviors they've enforced are down to this notion of enshittification, which Cory Doctorow, the tech critic and blogger, coined last year and became word of the year, I think, in a couple of places, and was basically this idea that kind of just the quality of what those services do, your Facebooks, your Amazons, your TikToks, your Instagrams, everything else, is just shit. It's just bad. This is going to sound really sort of sentimental and sort of nostalgic, but I think we got smartphones when they were sort of novel and optimistic, and there was this opportunity for new forms of interaction, and the world was expanding. And then the world that a 14-year-old now sees through their smartphone is relentless horror or thirst traps or whatever it is. And of course you're going to think, well, I don't want anything to do with this. This seems like utter garbage. And I think that's the driver of also trying out all these new devices. I think the physical aspects of it, the movement, the use of space, everything else is a piece of it. And the attempts at building new devices, whether it's the Humane Pin or the Rabbit R1 or the Terra Compass, they're all floundering around to go, that thing just isn't working. It's just completely colonized by utter crap. And it's not good, and no one wants it anymore. And we're sort of trapped with it because we're the generation that grew up with it. But lots of people don't want it. And so they're looking for something else that provides the functionality without providing the portal into that shit world that those companies have unleashed.
The Luddite Club piece, to me, if I bring that into the story as well, is like we are losing our ability to connect with human beings. I'm making an extreme assertion there, but to me, like that's the piece that feels really, really interesting. If we take the fact that like the shittiness of our devices, and we think about what does it really mean for a generation who has nothing to compare it to, like.
But I mean, again, we're generalizing, but the younger generation, as it were, they're not the ones coming up with these new devices. It's the millennials who are trying to come up with the new devices, right? The Terra Compass, the Rabbit R1, the Humane Pin, gestural interfaces, augmented reality, meta goggles. They're not coming from, we talk about a generational divide again, which is like a classic problem. But
yeah,
they're just saying, no, I just don't want anything. Thank you. We're all right. And then it's the millennials. Millennials are going, how about this thing? It shakes instead. Or how about this one? It's just got one button. And none of them are sticking.
But that's what I'm trying to say is like they want to go back to something that is just kind of like what our childhoods were when we were playing with Tamagotchis. And maybe there's a nostalgia that we are romanticizing here. Like, what do you make of the methaphone? as a project.
You can bracket the methaphone with other things like the surge of dumb phones and people wanting the lower fidelity interface that just doesn't have those physiological cues to attract your attention, like lights and color and movement and notifications and everything else.
But if we read it as like an emerging signal, right? I'm not saying that all of society is tapping into this. We're not seeing regulatory frameworks in a robust manner start to kind of support this, but we're seeing it in maybe the tech landscape in an emerging way. We're seeing it at the university level with youth, right? And I think that's what I'm really interested in is like, if we go like half a generation forward and we say like, okay, when the Columbia kids in the Lamp Club and the Luddite Club start, I don't know, like if they get married, if they cohabitate, if they co-produce, what is the word? Make babies. What's the word?
Yeah, if they co-produce babies.
If they co-produce babies.
That's exactly it, Rada. That's right.
If you think about a very simplified binary, there's like the Luddite Club, and then there is the 12-year-old being raised by a robot dog, to oversimplify that, right? And when those two worlds begin to interact with one another, or if they kind of intersect in some way, what version of a future are we starting to look at here? Like, what is happening in that world?
You just got to see the robot dog as an interface to the generative AI and not worry too much about its form, in which case that's going to be increasingly common. We know that already, and we know that there's plenty of research already on the cognitive impacts of regular interaction with generative AI, as well as the social impacts and so on and so forth. It's well documented in such a short time. It's pretty alarming.
But then there's also this other piece of it. I don't know if you remember is it Replica, the chatbot?
Of course I do. The January 2023 Replica update, in which they removed the erotic capabilities at the behest of the Italian authorities.
Yeah. Okay. But part of that was like so many of the users went up in arms. And one of the conversations we had is like, how does this change rituals around things like grieving? And how does that start to legitimize our relationship with, or augment our relationship with who and what we make connections with? Like, the last thing I'll say is I hope one of the things that comes out of movements like the Luddite Club and gatherings like Shitphone and stuff like that is like an okayness with being bored and having quiet space and dead space and things like that. Like,
I'll tell you what, I'll give you a big macro picture, because I've thought about this before, which is the idea that the future was the better place emerges, late 19th, around the time of the Luddites, and also into the 20th century. And the idea of that being associated with technology only really emerges in the interwar period in Europe, right? So the idea that the future is a better place and the future is achievable through technological advancement becomes into the popular conception at that point. Even if you think about, for instance, the rise of Nazism and the rise of communism, they were based on better future being about a different social order. Technology was a symptom of that social order, but it wasn't the cause of that change in social order until later, even in the 60s and 70s with the space race and the arms race and things like that. I would be keen to speculate and to emphasize that I think a big shift that's happening around all of this is a general, and it's not generational, I think it's for a lot of people, giving up on the idea of technology as the place where the future happens. That actually it's not the driver or the pull from the future anymore. I think there's probably a scramble for where is better. Is it still in the future, or is it living in a different way in the present? And is that achieved through technology anymore?
I love that. Why don't we leave it there? Because that's a beautiful sentiment to kind of, or at least an intriguing one to end on. Always have to have the last word, don't you, Tobias?
I don't always have to have the last word. It's just a coincidence of timing and then good editing.
Well, I hoped you liked my story time, because I had a really fun time this time.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to have a fun time editing it now. I'm making that make sense.
It basically writes itself, so I don't even know.
All
right, friend.
Speak to you later.
Bye.
Toodles.